There
There
we
we
go. We're recording.
go.
Thank you all for joining. So excited to be here today. As Brian already introduced us, but I'm Jennifer Lance at Kickbox, and we've got Mike at Customerio. Do you have anything you want to say before we jump right in, Mike, about what you do at Customerio?
Yeah, basically just anything involving deliverability, helping customers with deliverability, and anything adjacent to that, which is a lot of things. But yeah,
Excellent. So we have a quick little introduction about who we are as a company for both of us, because I know there's customers coming in from everywhere, and you may not have been exposed to us before. So I work for Kickbox. I lead up the consulting services, but Kickbox primarily, when we first started, was an email verification company. We verify through bulk upload, but also we do real-time verification. If you want to check your emails at the point of collection or at the point of entering into your CRM system. We also focus heavily on deliverability. Again, that's where I come from, but we have consulting services, and then we also have our deliverability tools for inbox monitoring, block list monitoring, DMARC monitoring, pre-check, and then also you can sync in your reputation tools like Google Postmaster and SNDS. So Mike, let's talk about Customerio.
Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know, or haven't taken a look in our platform in a little while, we're a customer engagement platform. Primarily that's kind of been historically what we are. So today we're going to be learning about spam rates. And a lot of that is related to, sending relevant messages to your users. Biggest challenge in achieving that sometimes is not having access to the customer data you need to that end. And like I said, we've been a Journeys product for a long time. It's probably what you know us for, campaign building, broadcast sending, based on key customer behavior, and that's done through email, SMS, in-app push, and in-app channels. Yeah. So I wanted to also mention our new CDP product. I don't know why I keep saying project. Basically, the CDP product unlocks all the data you need, helps you route it to the right tools without having to constantly bug your developers to build you a new integration, which is a place I've been many times. And really the real benefit of having your CDP and your ESP in the same platform is more accessible data, more personalized campaigns, and at the end of the day, the ability to create more relevant, customer experiences. So that was my very long blurb.
Excellent. And if you don't know, Customerio does have workflows where you can actually connect to Kickbox to get that data back, and then you can make decisions on what you want to do with that data and how you want to import it. It's super simple. We'll send over a link after the call with our follow-up email so that you can go and explore it if you'd like to try it out. If you're not a Kickbox customer and you want to test it, please let us know. We can throw you some credits and give us your feedback and how it's working, and if you have any suggestions. So on to why we're here. We're just gonna let this one marinate for a little bit. I think Mike and I really got a good chuckle out of this, and I think everybody can relate. You can relate from the deliverability standpoint. You can relate as a sender, and you can relate as an end user. And I think this makes a really good start to why we're here. And we'll get to all of this as we go through the different slides, but it's funny, but it also has some stinging points to it.
It is kind of a bittersweet one. When I read it, it's just like a little bit.
So we're going to give a little bit of foundation to this presentation, just so that we can tell you why we're going to give you the recommendations that we do and where it's coming from. So we're going to start with what are spam complaints. And Mike, can you take us through what they are and how you experience them?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a spam complaint, and I feel like a lot of the times there's kind of a false equivalency to like spam filtration. And what we're focusing on is that more powerful thing, that time when someone receives an email from you and they're it was so unexpected or so unwanted that they actually go through the menu in their various email clients, and they make that human action to mark that email as spam or as junk. That's the one that we're talking about the most today. There's also other forms of complaints. Somebody goes through the source code of your email, they're this angry, and they write to you, and you get the message. From my perspective, I've gotten those a couple of times, in the past, where someone was so mad that they actually wrote an email to the abuse address within the email body. And also you can get direct complaints to mailbox providers as well. So there's a lot of different ways that someone can really communicate that they don't want your email, but the spam complaint's the most powerful by far.
So we know how they do it, but then let's talk about kind of why. And there are two sections here, some that you can control more and some that maybe you have a little bit less control of. So Mike, take us through a few of your more, did I lose the screen? 1 second, let me reshare. Take us through some of your most obvious ones that you have to deal with and what they are and how you deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Fatigue, I'm glad it's the first one because I think it's probably one of the more common reasons people mark a message as spam. And yeah, someone will do that if, if someone purchased a list with your email address on it and you get this email that you don't recognize at all. That's one very common reason. But messaging fatigue is one that's often overlooked. It's really the result of just sending a ton of email to a recipient that, maybe for a while they played ball, maybe their relationship with you was relevant for a while, but that continual sending of email, if you're just hammering away, sometimes people have just had enough and they'll skip the unsubscribe button entirely and go right for that spam complaint. So yeah, it's like, and one thing I like to keep in mind, kind of a fun tip for customers where fatigue is like one of the root issues of it. It's just kind of think about, does this amount of email I'm sending, does this make sense for the relationship I have, with this recipient? So yeah, fatigue, a big one for me. I'd say lack of relevance kind of ties into that a little bit. I'd say subscribe by accident. I did want to mention that when I had a little note there as well. I think confirmed opt-in actually impacts the control and less control columns here too. Not giving your customers that choice really. So kind of went all over the place. Anytime we talk about this though, I'm just like, got a lot to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that reasons why you complain. You come in a way, you have certain expectations, you start getting the messaging and it doesn't meet the expectations. It might still be relevant, but it's not necessarily what they were expecting. So they can complain. And we've got the ones that are less control here. You can complain, but sometimes it's tied to, it's just easier to hit complain than delete, or the buttons are right next to each other. So you hit that one. And some people might have the assumption that, well, if I complain, then I won't just get them anymore. Not realizing what that complaint does for the sender. So they might not have this like angry, malicious intent behind their complaint, but it's their way to say, I know if I hit this button, I'm not going to get any more. Some people do like that. I know what the complaint does, so I'm going to do it. That's why it's a fun button. But
I'd be lying if I said I didn't do that. I'm like, I know how powerful this is. Take that. I want your t-shirts no mo.
Exactly. So there's a lot of reasons, but really it goes to the heart of, are you sending what your customers want? And you mentioned that at the very beginning, Mike, when you're doing your introduction. It's all about like, do you know your customer and are you giving them what they want? Again, there might still be some whoopsies, but when you think about the volume of spam complaints and being able to manage that, if you're hitting what they want, if you give them what they want, if you're setting expectations and meeting the expectations, you're going to get a lot less. Sometimes they do, like you said, you started mentioning when you talked about fatigue, age out a little bit. And I think about baby clothes. You have a parent who subscribes to baby clothes, and maybe those clothes are only from like infant to toddler or a little bit in the youth. At some point, the kids move on. And so you may not want them anymore. And if you keep mailing them without keeping that in mind and having data to support that continual mailing, they might get tired and they may not just go unsubscribe. They might just say, boop, spam is so much easier, so I'm going to do that. Yeah. But I think what we'll focus on today is, you can't always control stuff like an oopsies, but you can put stuff in motion for those other things on the left. You can control if they fatigue, when they fatigue, what you do if they start to fatigue before they complain. So those are the things we're going to focus on. as we go along. But first, Mike, why are they so bad?
Well, I mean, when I talk about spam complaints a lot, I feel like I sometimes get a little philosophical, but at the end of the day, it is a human action. This isn't some disembodied, spam filtering algorithm that sent an email into the spam folder. This is a thing that a person did, and they're talking to you, and they're talking to their inbox provider. And for that reason, inbox providers, spam complaints are one of the biggest negative signals that that an inbox provider sees, as it relates to like your relationship with their customers. So yeah, I mean, like we've talked about engagement in previous webinars. That's an indicator to inbox providers that, hey, maybe this recipient might not want these emails, but a spam complaint means they definitely don't want those emails. So, when those spam complaints start to tick up, inbox providers take notice. And yeah, degrading reputation. You might start getting filtered into the spam folder, maybe with some other sends that you might do in the future. ESP, like for example, like Customerio, leading to a suppression. We automatically suppress future attempts to send email to recipients that mark your messages as spam. So, and yeah, high spam rates, dismissal from ESPs. A lot of spam rates is not just bad for you as a sender; it's bad for the network of the email IPs that you're sending from. So for that reason, many ESPs will actually take corrective action when spam complaint rates are too high for too long.
Exactly. And ultimately, if you are being blocked and you are going to the spam folder, it will impact your return on investment. And whether that return on investment is dollars or just website visits, whatever it is, it will degrade that as well. Because the point of email is to drive an action. And if you can't drive that action, it's going to impact your whole performance and whatever other connections you may have.
Yeah, like anytime I'm troubleshooting deliverability, if I see a high spam complaint rate, that's what I'm addressing first. Like, why is this happening? Because it's like, I think we made the analogy in our last webinar too, me and Cody, where we talked about, you can pour all the efforts you want into like your content, your subject lines, and this, that, the other, but you have a super high spam complaint rate that cars never leave in the garage. So
exactly. Yeah. So great transition. What is a high spam complaint rate?
Doesn't seem very high, but it's actually 0.1% would be the threshold where problems are happening.
Yep. And again, it doesn't seem high, but when you take it out, it's 1 out of 1,000 when you just look at the numbers and not the percentage. And I look at this as you're not going to avoid spam complaints entirely. They're going to happen. Again, there was those reasons that we had for less control. You're always going to get a customer that's not happy. But if you can minimize them as best as possible, this number seems much more intimidating when you're a small sender. But when you think of, as a large sender, having one person complain isn't going to make or break you. As a small sender, it's going to be more impactful. But know that you will always get complaints. There will always be complaints that you might not see too. So keep that in mind. So to that point, Mike, tell us who actually sees the complaints.
So the person who's seeing the complaints unfiltered is your mailbox provider. There are some situations where your email sending provider is attempting to surface metrics and show you as many spam complaints as possible. And with most major providers, with the exception of Gmail, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, most major inbox providers, you can generally get a sense of what your spam complaint rate is. I found that with sending to a lot of smaller providers, maybe they don't have feedback loops that are going to send those metrics back to you as a sender. It can actually run into situations where the spam complaint rate that you see, like let's say you see a 0.1%, it could potentially be more than that. So, I mean, listen, if you ever even see yourself approaching that threshold, I'd say if you're starting at the 0.08 to 0.09 range, I'd even say that that's kind of telling us something and there might be more spam complaints that we're not seeing.
Right. And you mentioned feedback loops. So if you don't know what they are, as a sender, and your ESP will be the physical sender in this case, most ESPs, most reputable ESPs will make those connections to the mailbox providers to sign up to register for feedback loops. So basically they'll say, here are my IPs and my domains. If somebody complains, send that information back to me. We'll process it. and go on from there. So if you're a sender that doesn't use an ESP, for example, that's something that you want to look into. How do I sign up for feedback loops? Because that's data. If you're not signing up and you're seeing problems, it's probably because you're not removing people and you constantly mail to them. So you'd mentioned, MVP mailbox providers see the complaints, ESPs see the complaints, but we do know that they're not, as with every metric in email, none of them are accurate. But I want to touch on this a little bit more in terms of actually looking at some of the numbers. And Mike, you mentioned Gmail. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and if I could, I would scream this from a mountaintop, because I've run into so many situations where, especially situations where I'm trying to assist somebody with, bringing those spam complaint rates down there, and then we'll pull a report, and then they'll be like, "Oh, Mike, dude, I don't have any spam complaints with Gmail. This is awesome." Usually by this time I've let them know. So Gmail, for privacy reasons, they don't sense, there's no means of receiving those spam complaints back on an individual recipient basis. So within, say you're using an ESP like Customerio, that spam rate that you're seeing does not represent Gmail spam rates at all. So yeah, that's just something that they do in their own way. You can still see this data. You'll have to use a tool called Postmaster Tools, which is a really awesome, super transparent tool that Gmail provides. It allows you to see your IP domain reputation, and it will also give you your Gmail specific spam rates. So if you're troubleshooting spam rates and spam complaints, definitely sign your domain up for Postmaster Tools, because you're missing out on some super critical intelligence there.
Yeah. And so I don't expect you guys to really understand all the numbers on here, and you can look at it later if you like. But the takeaway is the two big numbers is that in your reports, you might see a 0.14%. And this is why Mike was mentioning that if you're approaching 0.08, 0.09 on your way to 0.1, it's because there's a lot of complaints that occur that aren't reported back to you. So if you're seeing a certain number, that that's the minimum, the absolute minimum. There are a number of providers that don't send feedback loop reports, Gmail being one of them, but a lot of other smaller ones. There are some that you can sign up for and you still might not get all of the reports. So if you're starting to hit what this very low number is, that 0.1, which seems very low, it's set low probably because there's so much more above that. And one of the things that you can do to really get a better feel is if you can, pull your reports by domain. So what are the spam complaints for Yahoo? What are the spam complaints for Hotmail? And so on. And again, some of them will be 0 because there are no feedback loop reports. But if you are getting spam complaints from those providers, it is at least a small gauge that you can use to get a feel for what is out there and what's being reported. So again, sorry, I jumped ahead on some of that.
It all ties together. It's hard not to.
Yeah.
It's hard not to.
So we know we have complaints. We know that complaints aren't always accurate. So then what do? How do we find out if there's a problem? If you have a low complaint rate, for example, how do you know there could be a problem anyway?
No, I've been buzzing in my chair. I was like, I can't wait to bring this point up, because this is actually a pretty big one. We talked about, being excited about that 0% Gmail spam rate. Well, what if your spam complaint rate, what if you look in your dashboard or wherever you review your metrics, what if you see, I don't have any spam complaints? This is totally rad. This is actually not totally rad, because there's one thing that has to happen before somebody can complain about an email is it has to show up in their inbox. Generally, there are those people who, like Jen mentioned, know the power of a spam complaint. Will actually go to their spam folder and double down. That does happen sometimes. But if you have a spam rate that is very, very low or at 0, I would say that's also indicating something pretty dire. And I would assume that it's indicating either there's a technical issue with FBL setup. Assuming that's not the case, we're probably seeing a high level of filtration.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, complaint rates, not the only metric that we can use to see, how are our recipients feeling about us. I would say opens, and like Jen mentioned, no one of these metrics will tell a complete story. With Apple privacy protection, which high level, it's a new thing that not very new anymore, where essentially to protect the privacy of their recipients, iOS email client users have the option of enabling something called mail privacy protection. And what this does is it inflates open rates. Essentially, they will automatically open emails that you send to recipients who use that client. The reason I mention this is there's a lot of people will say open rates, don't matter anymore. I would say a low open rate is actually more valuable intelligence now than it's ever been, because open rates are inflated by a lot of things, bots, things like that. If you're seeing a low open rate coupled with no spam rates, that's telling us a story. And I almost got out of breath there because I'm so passionate about this.
And
Yeah.
also, with that, even before you get to the engagement metrics, there's bounces. And if you're starting to see bounce messages, and that's something you can work with your provider, besides getting a category of hard, soft, block, or whatever category they provide, say, can I get the reason or the SMTP message that comes back that tells me what that bounce is? Because if you're getting bounces that are indicating spam, that's also potentially, and depending on receiver, a good sign that they're seeing stuff and they're hearing stuff from their customers that they don't like. And so it's coming across as spam. And so that tells you have a problem. I also think, you have a problem where you're leading to one when your engagement starts to become lackluster, because that is also telling. So it might not necessarily be a huge spam complaint yet, but it's on the way to either getting a spam complaint or something else happening. Especially also if you see that you have high unsubscribes on a particular stream or at a particular time in the life cycle with your customer, and you're not paying attention to those unsubscribes when they're happening, when they inflate in other correlations, that's when you might start to see complaints follow. And again, all of these individually can tell you something of when something's a problem, or, especially and then if you look at when the metrics happen, I think time is so important. I think we underrate how important time is in everything we do. Because if you're thinking about, if I'm getting a lot of complaints off the welcome, look at your onboarding, right? So you have to not just look at the numbers, but when the numbers occur and to whom and what streams. I'm going to get really passionate and lose my breath too.
Well, I'm going to double down with another dose of passion, because there is one interesting thing that I have seen over the years, and that's like getting in situations where sometimes there's a very tight window when you can actually get that valuable intelligence from spam complaint rates. And what I mean by that is I generally don't see senders who maintain super high spam complaint rates over a long period of time. And yeah, the reason for that is as that happens, and if it's allowed to happen for a very long time, you might get into that no spam complaints, low opens territory before we even had a chance to really troubleshoot. So a lot of the times data retention is a thing too. So I know some senders who aren't using ESPs who weren't keeping, logs of metrics for long periods of time, which means they might have had a spam complaint rate issue 6 months ago, but now they don't have the data to see where that actually was occurring at. So I guess the moral of that little blurb is just, pay attention to your metrics actively. Pay attention, not just complaint rates, but all of these, because all of them are going to let you know that there's something amiss in one way or another. So
exactly. And so when we do find that we're elevating, to your point, what do we need to do? How can we reduce those spam complaints? How can we get on top of it either before we start sending or as we start to see an elevation?
Happy to jump in here. The one thing I say is the first thing I usually look at if I have a recipient who's talking about a high spam complaint rate, first thing that we check is opt-in. So, I really hammer down on setting messaging expectations as a really powerful tool in reducing spam complaint rates, because if somebody expects to receive a message or they're excited about receiving a message, you've used confirmed opt-in, on your forms, you have a checkbox for marketing messages that is not checked by default. I know, I've seen it. All of those pre-flight things that you can do when you first start that relationship are critical to maintaining low spam complaint rates overall. So that's where I definitely would start. I think another one I'd mention quickly is make it easy to unsubscribe. I'd say a higher unsubscribe rate is a great thing. It's great intelligence, really. It just goes to show that your recipients were engaging with your emails, and you made it such that they didn't have to mark your message as spam. You just listened to them and you opened the door, and your unsubscribe link was not in the 4-pixel fine print at the very bottom of your email, the same color as the background. Like, there's nothing wrong with keeping that front and center. So I'd say those are my two big ones for before there's a problem.
Yeah, and to your point about unsubscribes, knowing they're high helps identify if there's other things you need to improve, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because it's an unsubscribe is a breakup that you both agree to, essentially, versus a spam complaint where it's one person screaming and yelling and be like, I'm out of here. So you want that you want that I'm okay, we're just gonna part our ways. You can always come back later. And so list unsubscribe helps with that. And if you don't know what it is, most ESPs have this deployed, and it's a tag that they put in the top of your emails and the email headers that gives the information for the mailbox provider to then put into their UI a link or a button that says click here and you can unsubscribe. And it not only helps your reputation, because unsubscribes aren't a bad thing, but it's a better user experience, because now people aren't scrolling around saying, where's my spam complaint button? I'm going to see if I can pull up an example to show you real quick. Although you can't see me, really, I'm probably really tiny on the screen. But on Yahoo, for example, in the mail app, if I scroll down and someone has list unsubscribe, there's a big unsubscribe button at the bottom. And I love that. I love that Yahoo has it in their app, because it makes it easy for me that, again, I know too much about email, but I don't want to hurt a reputation. So I just scroll to the bottom and click unsubscribe. And then when I can't find it, that's when I get annoyed. So if you have list unsubscribe, awesome. If you don't, ask your provider, how do I get this deployed, or what do I need to do? Is there a checkbox or something along those lines? Some other things, keep your forms protected. You can get spam complaints if someone comes on your list that didn't intend to subscribe. And Mike, I know you have articles about list bombing and stuff, but those are things too that you can use to help others who didn't intend to get your message, and they're suddenly like, why am I getting this? Again, they might just complain. And it goes, Mike made that point earlier, if it's unexpected. So if you protect your forms, if you can even verify them, so if it's a typo, you can help take care of that too. Those are things that can help you reduce your spam complaints. And then one of your big points, Mike, before about you're speaking to a person, send wanted mail. Don't just send because you can send. Make sure there's purpose behind what you're doing and that there's a reason you're communicating. I think email is just so easy and cheap that we tend to just throw it at everything as the solution. But if you have no purpose and there's no purpose for your end customer, that's what's going to drive a lot of the complaints. I'm going to pause there if you want to add.
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to add, and I actually saw a question in chat, and I know that's very topical. Like, how do I protect my form? A lot of different ways. I'd say it's just good to kind of set up little roadblocks. So I'd say the most common way that forms are protected is using a reCAPTCHA or some version of that. And what that is, it's just a little puzzle that people can prove that they're not robots before they sign up. That's a really effective way of form protection. You can either have one that just pops up and has a little puzzle. I know there's also ones that operate in the background as well. And I would also double down on confirmed opt-in, because that kind of ties back into setting messaging expectations. Like if I sign up for a website and I check that marketing box and I've proven that I'm not a bot, and then I get that email that verifies my email address and then lets me know the kind of messages I'm going to receive, and I get to opt in again, like to have someone say yes is powerful. And it's gonna, I don't know, it's like going on that date and you got a lot of that positive feedback and they want to go on another date with you and you had just had the best time. I think that's kind of what that achieves. You get that validation.
Yes.
So I guess that's like a love language for email. It's confirmed opt-in.
I love that. And by the way, we've been talking about a lot of great information. We will also add a ton of our links in our follow-up email. So if you want to learn a little bit more, for example, about form protection, we'll have a link in there for that. So those are things that you can consume afterwards when you have time to help fill in some of the blanks here. So with that, reducing spam complaints, we should also talk about increasing engagement because if you're increasing engagement, there's a lot of positive there. And you mentioned something so powerful yesterday about how closely these are tied together. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, yeah, we're doing all the things to reduce those spam complaints. And was this the little sterno thing? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, you also mentioned like if you're doing all the things to reduce spam complaints, it naturally helps you.
Right. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the cool thing is when you're starting to focus on those engaged recipients, you're getting that confirmed opt-in, you're paying attention, you're sending relevant content, all the things that we would advise someone to do to reduce spam complaint rates actually is the same thing that we advise people to do if they just want to increase that engagement. So all of those positive things like filtering your large broadcasts to those who are consistently engaging with your email, having a sunset policy in place. And if you don't know what a sunset policy is, it's a email engagement based criteria for essentially identifying as a business, like when are we going to let that relationship go? Because a lot of customers, they might not give you those indicators that they don't want to receive your email anymore until it's too late. So it's always nice to have a criteria of, for example, if somebody hasn't engaged with my marketing email in 4 months or 6 months, maybe either send one re-engagement email, maybe remove them from the list entirely. Having some kind of mechanism in place is huge. So that's one big one I wanted to call out is the sunset policy.
I love that. And also, we've said it before, when you think about the end user and what their experience is, and not just with your brand, but just with email and what makes email easy for them. I don't know about anybody else, but if things aren't easy for me, I'm not going to do it. I take the fastest path from A to B. We're all too busy in life right now. And so what is it that can make that experience relevant, clear? So like welcome emails are very good because you're sending something, or even like you said, a confirmed opt-in right away. So, because I also, again, we're too busy. I forget what I did yesterday. Or I forgot what I did yesterday. So imagine if you get an email and there's a delay between their first sign on and when you email, you need to be timely. But if there is a delay, make that first delay a reminder or some sort of like why you have a relationship. Because I've gotten emails and I sit there and I'm like, did I sign up for this? I don't remember if I signed up for this. And then I kind of struggle with, well, what do I do with it? And do I want it? So if you can be timely right away, get that engagement right away, or have preference pages, give choice to people. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to fill out the preference page, but you can give them choice and then collect data when you're getting that preference page right there. And that data is very powerful for all the other things you're going to do. And make sure like click to actions we mentioned here above the fold. Again, we're all busy. If you have all your click to actions kind of tucked away, are people, especially because a lot of people use their mobile phone, think about like also how they're consuming your email. Are they going to want to scroll and do all of those things and click? Or is it easy to click when you have a big finger when you're on mobile, right? All those things, like go through the experience yourself to say, if this is my email, am I putting in, am I making it easy? If I click on this with my finger, am I actually going to click on 2 links or the wrong link? Those are all things that make you want the experience to be pleasant. Because once it's not pleasant, that's when people don't want it anymore.
I really like what you said, to go through the experience yourself. That's something that I've, sometimes we'll get to a certain point with, working with somebody on this very thing where just having that empathy for your recipient is huge. And ask yourself, like, and be honest, just sit yourself down, maybe look in the mirror, like, would I read this email? Or would I expect this email? Is this relevant? Is someone going to want to know they abandoned a cart 3 days ago? Are they going to remember that? And I will say, as far as like preference centers, I did want to mention, please don't make people sign in to access the preference center. Please, please, please. Because actually that for me is one of the most common reasons I'll mark an email as spam. If I go to a preference center and I have to log in, or I have to go through anything more than just managing that, I'm out. So.
Now, the sterno that you had mentioned earlier, because I feel like you dropped the nuggets and now we have to talk about it. That was in reference to the sending message people want to receive.
I don't know why. I'm just like obsessed with that analogy. So I think one big thing too is, as we talked about fatigue, we talked about increasing engagement. I do want to mention that opt-in is not forever. So the sterno thing that we're talking about is, let's say you're at a banquet. Let's say there's all these wonderful catering dishes, those metal ones that you see, and underneath there's that little fire thing. Most common name brand for that is sterno. And I'm really covering 6 city blocks before I get to why this analogy is important. Is that fire over the course of that lovely banquet does slowly fizzle out over time. And are there a million other ways I could have said this? Absolutely. But I will say the fire does go out eventually with recipients, so pay attention to that. Opt-in expires. It's not forever.
Yeah,
Sometimes your customers aren't going to tell you that. Sometimes you have to be the one to recognize that, because often, I mean, think about the amount of email you get on a daily basis. I think there's a lot of responsibility as senders to start to end those to not start the relationship, but to end those relationships sometimes.
I agree. And that's why the reactivation campaigns and repermission are very helpful, because if they're not interacting and they don't bite on that reactivation campaign, that whatever carrot you're dangling in front of them, if they're not biting, if they're not chasing it, then it's time to say, maybe we need to take a break for a little while and you can come back when you're ready. And it also goes into, when you think about GDPR, and at some point, if this customer is not interacting with you, and not just through email, think about these interactions too, because email, again, it's very, the metrics are wobbly at best. So how are they interacting with you as a company outside of this email? Are they going to your website? Are they buying? Are they reading your newsletters? Whatever you're offering through your email paths. If you find that person has kind of poof, gone in any way, shape, or form through some of those interactions, then you really have to say, I might not even need to retain this data, and we should probably just say goodbye.
Email engagement metrics, I'd mention too, on top of that, is those are really important indicators to you, to inbox providers. They're paying attention to those things. I would say, yeah, leveraging that business data is huge. So like, to kind of tie into what Jen's saying, like let's say you're tracking page views, let's say you're tracking logins, or if you notice let's say you have a subscription service, you notice your customer hasn't renewed and you've been sending them email for years and years, that's now no longer relevant with your brand. That's a big one too. So I'd say, like, when creating a sunset policy too, definitely email engagement based criteria, I think, are a good foundation for that. But I think leveraging as much business data as you can is super critical to just identifying potential recipients that might not want to receive those messages anymore. And just kind of a quick thing on re-engagement campaigns. One thing that I like to mention is, if let's say you just sent a re-engagement email like, hey, you still want to receive our emails, I would assume that that person has opted out, and give them the chance to opt back into your email. I try to avoid advising customers to do like a negative on that. So if they don't say they don't want it, I'm going to keep sending them email. I'd say give them that power, like put the ball in their court in that when you're sending those types of messages.
Mm-hmm. And we touched a couple times how inaccurate metrics are in terms of for a sender receiving, as anybody opening or clicking. But something to keep in mind too, when you think about increasing engagement, mailbox providers see other actions. And I forgot to click this sooner, but it's there now. So some other things you could play around with are there other features in mailbox applications that can help increase engagement, even if you don't see it, but you want them to increase engagement because the mailbox providers see it. So do you want to remind them to star? It might help you with reputation, or snooze it for later, whatever it is. Like, what are some fun actions you can drive, even again, if you can't measure them? Are there other technologies like Yahoo uses Schema to help highlight your delivery notifications, or AMP, or just anything else that you can get additional actions? Start to look at what are those cool features that are coming out, Gmail annotations, or anything that highlights your email in the inbox, but also just gives the customer another way to interact with your message outside of an open and a click. It's, again, more beneficial for the mailbox providers, and you won't necessarily see the fruits of that work, especially if you already have a good reputation. But those are little things that I think can really help establish all those strong signals of why you're wanted.
Yeah, I've even seen, I saw one sender a while ago who they had included some logic in their email content where if the from address that was a Gmail address, that there would be a blurb in there about encouraging a star on the email, but that wouldn't show up for any other mailbox provider. And I was just like, respect. That's a pretty cool move.
Awesome.
Wow.
So I see we have a number of questions because I want to move into Q&A, but Mike, do you have anything you want to part with before we jump into Q&A?
I don't think I have any more analogies. I think let's answer some questions.
Okay. Brian, I saw you popped up earlier. Do you have any?
Yeah, no, there's a couple more recent ones. Maybe I should take them from top to bottom. But anyway, I just thought it was kind of more relevant to what y'all were mentioning about, maybe treating subscribers differently, but recurring theme about transactional emails, and like why people would still be marking them as spam, even though they're transactional, right? Normally, conventional wisdom would say that the open rates would be much higher, but yeah, I mean, are there any other clues that we should look for if those kinds of emails are being marked as spam?
I think there's a few things, right? I'll have two and then I'll leave it for you. One, there are occasions when you are connecting your, let's say your phone mail app through IMAP to your mailbox provider, and that mail app decides to filter it. There are some cases where it generates a spam complaint report, even though you didn't hit spam complaint. So that's one of those whoopsies that you can't control. But I also used to work with a client who sent transactional, and they always got spam complaints on their bill notifications. I think some people, again, it could be an accidental.
This is specified like in the question. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, sometimes they accidentally hit spam because they think it's delete. And they don't realize the ramifications of like, this might mean you're not going to get it anymore. In terms of senders might still mail it because it's transactional, but it still might go to the spam folder. But some people are, I think, try to use it. And I've heard from other clients because if they say they don't get their bill, they don't have to pay it.
Yeah, the billing notification one. I mean, because like that's a rough situation to be in. I'd say one thing I've seen be very helpful in that, because yeah, I mean, those are notifications. I mean, those are transactional messages. And I should quickly mention, I think that there's been a few times when I've been, working with somebody on that issue, and then I come to find out like this message is not transactional. For example, and this is going to be controversial to some in the e-commerce space, I do not believe that an abandoned cart email is a transactional email. Yes, it does happen, but it's happening as the result of no transaction. So that's one quick thing. Is your message transactional? Are you including marketing content in your transactional messages? Those are two reasons why I've seen spam complaints might be increased for those kinds of mailings. But for billing notifications, I've also found that if ahead of sending an email, if you offer your recipients other potential ways of receiving that information, SMS messages, push notifications, just any other messaging channels, if you kind of put the power in your customer's hand for like how they want to receive those notifications, that might be a good way to get those spam complaint rates down on your transactional mail.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably some nuance here, right?
I love the comment you made about mixing the promotional and transactional. In the US, it's, if it's primarily transactional, you're fine. You can mark it as transactional. It's not the case for other countries. So I like the idea of just make it transactional. Just leave it at that. And then if there's complaints, you start to dive a little bit deeper into why that is.
Totally. But yeah, if y'all have additional questions, like that's really specific to yours, to your situation, we'll give contact information here in the next couple slides, I think. So keep a lookout for that. But yeah, so moving on to other questions. Another kind of common theme is about, what to do when you've identified a problem. So like the first couple, I think were about like, if you switch, an example is when you switch ESPs, right? Switch sending platforms, Customer IO is given an example here. And then you see open rates drop, right? With a send volume around 30,000. What are some insight that you can provide there?
Mike, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to mention, one thing I try to suggest is, and mention is essentially when you're sending email to inbox providers, there's a certain expectation there. So permanence is a factor in email deliverability. How long have you been sending from an IP or a domain? And when you switch to a different sending provider, there are a lot of parts of your sender fingerprint that can change. For that reason, I generally suggest, kind of easing into any transition between providers. Essentially a soft warming period. Doesn't have to be as extreme as warming an entirely new subdomain. That can be one major factor. But yeah, there's a lot of different things. I know one big reason that I've seen when a lot of the times people switching between email sending providers or automation providers is that perhaps they didn't bring over that engagement data from their previous provider or didn't bring over their suppression list. That's a big one too. But I'd say if you have questions about deliverability, you can always write into our support team too. We do limit that extreme deep dive deliverability support to the premium subscriber level, but we're always happy to point people in the right direction, take a look, get best practices in place where we can identify potential technical issues, things like that. So yeah, if you do have questions, if you ran into some issues, we're happy to help out with that. So,
and I would keep in mind, every ESP is different. They use different terms for the same thing. They define bounces different. They define count open rates and counts different. They even some suppress certain bot activity, for example, than others. So no matter what you do, your rates will be different. It's all about looking at the full picture. With those rates being lower, are you seeing inboxing issues or hearing complaints about it? Are you monitoring it in other ways? Are you seeing reputation changes? Are your end metrics, your purchases or your website visits, are they down as well? Because we just recently worked through a warm up with a client and they went from like a 40% open rate to like 15, 20. But when we looked at the end metrics, they were higher than what their previous provider was. So really what was happening is however they were calculating rates before is different than their new provider. And it was scary for them to see in the campaign reports. But when you really kind of dig in, you're able to trace it and really see if you have a problem or not. And then like Mike said, you think about the reputation that you're building and the history.
Totally. No, really good insight. Another one about kind of like, damage control. Somebody says that they were hacked, right? And now they're having certain problems with just certain mailbox providers. I feel like maybe, hopefully there's some low hanging fruit there. But yeah, what would y'all do in that situation? What advice would you give?
Hacked as in like the sender's account was hacked or?
I'm guessing.
Okay. That's a hefty one.
Yeah, because like that ventures into potential reputation repair. I would say, I think a common, this might be the situation we're talking about. There could be times when, perhaps somebody spoofed your domain or sent a bunch of email from your account, or a list bomb happened. That's another common way. I'd say first step, yeah, definitely assess, get rid of any fraudulent sign up email addresses if you can identify them. I'd say that is step one. Lock down any forms or lock down whatever vector it was that the exploit took place. I'd say first stop on the repair train is sign up for Postmaster tools and just see where you're at with your reputation. I push Postmaster tools a lot just because for the most part, I would say that, especially for a lot of North American senders, Gmail does represent the biggest portion of their recipient base. So I'd say start taking a look at your reputation first and just kind of see where you're at. And yeah, kind of make your reputation repair plan sort of from there. But yeah, I saw like the face you made, Jen, because yeah, this can be a very difficult thing it's not irrecoverable, but there's a lot of individual factors that kind of influence the advice there.
And if you haven't been compromised, put the steps in place today. So multi-factor authentication, audit who has access to your systems, how broad that access is. You said spoofing, take a look, have your provider look at your authentication records. Are they too broad? Are they allowing too many people authority to send? Are you putting in a huge a domain that gives access to 6,000 IPs to send in your behalf? Or can you narrow that down? Those are things that can help your system. And if you do have a bad reputation, whether it's through compromise or otherwise, Mike said it can be done. It does take time. How long really depends on how bad the reputation is and how big your audience is and what you're trying to do. But you start with fixing what the problem is, and then reach out to those who you know get your email, those who are engaging. And in this case, email engagement is helpful because if they're engaging, you know that they're at least getting it. And so start with them. And then as they start to engage, then slowly expand, work with your deliverability teams to get remediation tickets in, explain the situation. And you have to slowly climb your way out, which is hard to deal with because time is always of the essence, but it's how it works today.
Totally. And Mike, you mentioned Google Postmaster tools. Someone asks, what are the requirements for that? They ask specifically if you need a dedicated sending domain versus, if you're using a shared IP. Are there any requirements there?
You would need to control the DNS records of your sending domain. So yeah, it would be whichever of your domains is authenticated with DKIM or SPF, that's going to be the domain that you're generating that reputation data on. So all that's required is to create a CNAME record to verify that domain to prove ownership of it. I will also say there's also a volume consideration there. The exact threshold, I don't know. I think it's around, I usually say around, if you're sending less than 800 to 1,000 emails in a day, you're probably not going to be able to see that data in Postmaster tools. It's only going to generate that data for days where you actually met that threshold. But yep, as long as you have control over your sending domains, DNS, and can create that CNAME record, that's all that's required to sign up.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Man, yeah, we got a lot of questions, but I'll limit it to one or two more. Yeah, I don't know if there's any that caught your eye. We have one about the wonderful promotions folder, and another about list churn for B2B, folks who maybe like leave the company. But yeah, maybe I'll leave those two and see which one y'all are interested in.
What's the one for list churn? I'm curious.
Let's see. It's hold on, let me find it here. There's a lot of them. I don't remember, but it's just basically saying, hey, how do you remove folks, or how do you prevent folks to sending to them if their email address has gone quote unquote stale? If they were with a company and then they've left to a different position.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's when there's nothing wrong with having an email bounce. And you could do verification services, but if you're a company that doesn't accept all, you're not going to necessarily know if an email bounces until you get through and send to them multiple times. Just pay attention to your bounces and take them off when they bounce. If it says user unknown, or some other variation of that, and most ESPs will have regex for this, just take them off your list at that point. Bounces are troublesome when they're high, and they're high over time, but bounces are going to happen. I don't know if you have more to add to that, Mike.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Email is going to bounce sometimes, much like a basketball. So there's another analogy. Much different outcome though. I did see a question here that I actually think is super topical though. And this is not Mike bias. This is from there's another Mike has asked. If Gmail hides the recipient of a complaint, how can I remove them from my mailing list? I'm using Oz SES to send emails. And yeah, so I think that kind of circles back to our other slide though, where we talk about looking at other metrics other than spam complaint rates. So, maybe if you can keep an eye on recipients who their engagement has slowed down or stopped, or you're not seeing conversions from those recipients anymore. They're not clicking your emails. They're not interacting with your platform. With Gmail, it does force you to kind of go to other data points, but those other data points are telling you the same kind of story that your spam complaints would. And in fact, focusing on those data points before it gets to a spam complaint is something that we suggest for, I think, any inbox provider, not just Gmail.
And this is where list unsubscribe is so important, because when you hit complain in Gmail and you have list unsubscribe, they do have a pop-up before you hit complain again that says, would you like to unsubscribe or spam and unsubscribe, something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you have that list unsubscribe option, that person now can just hit unsubscribe and they'll send you an email that just says unsubscribe. You won't know if they marked spam or if they're coming unsubscribe through another way, but you have a clear signal, take them off your list. So the list unsubscribe is so helpful in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really quick, because Mike, I wanted to give you a chance before we end, because we're near the top of the hour. There's one more thing I know Customer I wanted to share.
Just realized what time it was. Yeah. So I definitely want to talk about our next webinar. So we brushed the surface a couple of times today on using data to build more engaging campaigns and emails. If you're curious about how Customerio might compare to your current CDP or ESP, if you're looking for some inspiration on your next omni-channel campaign, any of that, join our product showcase next Thursday. And my buddy Cody went ahead and dropped that in the chat for you. There's a link to sign up. Again, webinars, no pressure walkthroughs of campaign ideas, strategies, just show off some pretty cool ways you can use your data more effectively in your emails, which ties a lot into what we talked about today. So also, if you want to see a walkthrough of Customerio just in general, if you're not familiar with the platform and you want to learn a bit more about it, again, definitely book a demo. My buddy the Code Man down here has dropped yet another link for you. And yeah, I'm calling you Code Man starting now. This is all brand new. Yeah, just go ahead and let us know which industry you're in as well, via the link. And yeah, let us know when you want to book a demo and we can show you some rad stuff.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. Kickbox will have more webinars as well. Next month is the next one. Follow us on our blog, contact Mike and I, whatever you need to. We're happy to be here. I'm so glad everyone joined today. And thank you, Mike. You've been awesome co-presenter here.
No, you.
No, you're awesome. No, we really appreciate it.
Right now.
We appreciate y'all lending your expertise. I personally learn a lot too, even just hosting these. So really appreciate it. We will follow up very soon with the recording of this and with some relevant resources. And if you all have any questions, you can reply to that email or these emails here. Appreciate everybody joining today. Have a good one.
Bye.
How do I stop the recording? There it is.